Oregon is demure and lovely, and it ought to play a little hard to get. The overriding challenge, the umbrella issue of the decade in Oregon is quality of life in Oregon.
We talked a lot about what Tom McCall did as governor as we drove over to eastern Oregon that morning. As we traveled, it seemed to us that this is where the Tom McCall story begins. A story about a man who loved his state and its people, and they loved him too. A lesson for America, perhaps. Tom McCall became a professional journalist, first as a newspaperman, later as a radio and TV reporter and commentator. All the McCall kids carried the lessons their mother taught them so well: accepting responsibility, meeting challenges. As a journalist, it seemed to Tom McCall that protecting Oregon's environment was a responsible challenge. For openers, he decided it was time to clean up a 270-mile-long open sewer known as the Willamette River.
Part of these wastes are concentrated and burned, but most of them are diluted and dispersed in the rivers and streams, making the pulp and paper industry the largest contributor of organic waste to the water of Oregon. Where these wastes are not treated in a safe manner, the effluent becomes an oxygen-gulping, slime-making scourge. It destroys fish life. It fouls fishing gear and fishing boats. Sometimes it churns at river's bottom, forming into rafts that rise to the surface as sluggish, foul-smelling masses of filth.
McCall took the message to TV viewers in a national award-winning documentary, Pollution in Paradise. Tom Dargan was the program director at Portland television station KGW at the time.
You'd look in the Willamette River, and fish would be going belly up, floating down, including carp that can live in, very poorly oxygenated water.
McCall's documentary led to anti-pollution laws being approved by the Oregon legislature. The process of cleaning up the Willamette began to move forward, slowly but forward. People require things: clean air, clean water, places to live, places to work, places to play. And almost without noticing, people can take over the natural resources which stand in their way. So Tom McCall worried. Because without timber, and without farmland, and without rivers clean enough for fish, Oregon would, well, not be Oregon. It would become something else. Half-jokingly, he suggested to a convention that they enjoy the visit, but don't, for heaven's sake, move here to live. What?
The whole point was, it was just a cautionary finger. And the whole thing in my mind was that you think about the carrying capacity of your state. I mean, how you can have as many people there as the state can carry in terms of a balance between its economy and its ecology. That's it, just that you don't knee-jerk into the position of all growth, crazy growth, stinking growth, or knee-jerk into the position that we're going to all live in tree houses and eat grass.
You don't have to be very old to remember taking bottles back to the store for deposit money. The kids used to pay for a lot of Saturday movies and popcorn with the money they'd get. But a funny thing happened. The people who manufacture all kinds of drinks decided Americans should just throw the containers away instead of returning them. Well, by the late 1960s, Oregon legislators were talking about a return to returnables. legislation that would include deposits on both beer and soft drink containers, while at the same time outlawing pull tabs on cans. At first, Tom McCall opposed the bill, though not vigorously. However, by 1971, Tom McCall became one of the bill's strongest advocates.
Then came the thought that if you had throwaways, you being the brewers, you being the pop bottlers, you wouldn't have to be responsible for the logistics of taking these bottles back and sending them and washing them. And therefore, you could grow bigger and bigger. You wouldn't have to have your presence in every region or every state or every town to handle the bottles. So the ultimate of that would be, Paul, that you would have one brewery, maybe in the center of the United States, and one pop bottler, and you'd bombard the United States with 400 billion cans and bottles a year with no responsibility.
The night before the Senate vote, I was offered the bribe of $5,000 by a now deceased lobbyist for organized labor who was representing to me the Glass Institute or whatever the hell it was.
And I debated the bottle bill less than 3 years ago in front of the Cleveland City Club. The vice president of the Continental Can Company turned on me and said, "Don't you ever foist the Luddite ways of the people of Oregon on the people of Ohio." And he was a native of Ohio as he booed in his own state.
Because of Tom McCall's in-person testimony, some other states have adopted bottle bills. But Congress, under intense pressure from the same folks who battled Oregon's bottle bill, have been using their profits and political powers to block similar federal legislation.
Apparently the decision was made that, okay, we'll go on the basis that if it works in Oregon, by God, it won't work anywhere else. Why, do you know what they are up there? They're nothing but a bunch of woodsy weirdos.
That's what they say about Oregon.
That's what I've had spread at me.
Tom McCall understood his people because he listened to them. But sometimes his ideas for solving problems even left his supporters gasping. Like when the American Legion decided to hold its big convention in Portland, and young folks from all over America decided to drop in just to let the Legionnaires know that not everyone supported the Vietnam War. Well, the potential for violence was as real as it was frightening. Tom McCall didn't want Portland, Oregon to become synonymous with Kent State. Maybe the best idea would be to get the kids, out of town or diverted someplace else. Like maybe throwing a rock concert. This was Vortex, the state-sanctioned and supported rock festival held at McIver State Park, about a half-hour's drive from Portland and the Legion Convention. The idea came from McCall's executive assistant, Ed Westerdahl.
We came up with a pretty radical approach, which was called Vortex One, but in essence a legalized pot party. That was in the final days of Tom's campaign for governor.
Probably came close to hysterics. Just what an impossible, implausible, Westerdahl, are you crazy,
But he was also convinced it was the right thing to do to keep Portland from becoming a battleground.
Tom McCall's staff, including press aide Ron Schmidt, supported Vortex, but Schmidt also told McCall, throw a rock concert, and you'll probably lose the re-election campaign.
He had a swivel chair, and he swiveled around with his back to us, and he just kind of looked up for a minute. We were all waiting for the response, swiveled back and said, "I have just made my decision. I have just committed political suicide. We're going to have Vortex."
Just finally came to the conclusion that handling this right would incidentally be good politics.
The young folks had a great time at the rock concert. Some anti-war protesters were in Portland, but there was no violence, except for one broken window, damage estimate $40. Tom McCall was re-elected 2 months later. Tom McCall's tax reform plan was complicated. He'd answer one question, they'd ask him 5 more. He personally campaigned for the proposal, which called for the state to pick up 90% of school operating costs, coupled with a lid on expenditures.
Something like that is tremendously hard to create, almost impossible to pass, and yet so easy to attack. That's what makes you sad. We invested 15 months of our lives in that, working as hard as we could.
It also was the only significant fiscal, I won't call it reform, but fiscal plan in my 20 years in the legislature. Hatfield once came out for a simple tax program, whatever the hell it was, to get 64 million bucks. Tom had a plan geared to local governments and school district perpetuations and so forth.
And it just would have assured a high level of education all across the state.
McCall was with longtime friend Clay Myers the night voters rejected his tax plan and talked about resigning.
It's as close as I've ever seen him to becoming emotionally destroyed as far as his relationship with people, because Tom is a people person. He loves people, and he felt that it was such a good plan that there was no way it could be rejected.
He felt unworthy. He thought, the people are telling me that I'm not a leader. And somebody, this is so important, we ought to get somebody in here to lead it, because this needs to be done.
Tom McCall did not resign. Education financing is still a problem in Oregon. Some schools have even closed because voters say they can't afford higher property taxes. The State Capitol News Corps was well aware that Tom McCall was human. He used to hang around the press room. He described himself as a journalist on loan to government, and his staff never did break him of the habit of leaking stories to the media.
They would say, "Tell us about it, Tom." I said, "Well, I think Ron's going to put out something tomorrow, but here's how I view it." And then he'd come upstairs and come into my office, and he said, "You know, I ran into some press guys, and they really are interested about this little story that we talked about just 5 minutes ago." He was marvelous.
I kept a few things back. I can't
Name two.
Oh, don't push me now.
If a governor has to be protected, or if any politician has to be protected by a press secretary, then basically that man or that woman should not be in office.
Recently, state officials decided to eliminate the words, "We hope you will enjoy your visit," from the road sign at the Oregon-California border. The sign now reads, "Welcome to Oregon." Tom McCall participated in the ceremony. Well, sort of.
There's been a lot of bad mouthing about visit but don't stay. It served its purpose. We were saying visit but don't stay because Oregon, queen bee though she is not yet ready for the swarm. And I think you'll all be just as sick as I am if we find it is nothing but a hungry hussy throwing herself at every stinking smokestack that's offered.
Tom McCall hasn't surrendered his basic commitment to preservation and protection of Oregon's natural resources. He doesn't want to see the place trashed. He knows you don't grow trees in parking lots. You can't raise crops on housing developments. Fish can't survive in polluted waters. Humans can't breathe filthy air and remain healthy. Tom McCall's critics can enjoy the luxury and safety of perfect rear-view vision. But that's fair, because Tom McCall understands nothing is perfect. Modifications and changes to many programs may be necessary. But Tom McCall's commitment was to a balance between a healthy economy and a clean environment. And without that balance, Oregon won't be a nice place to live. It won't even be a nice place to visit.